Welcome to the Radical Rhythm Podcast. This has been created for those of us that love radical women who live perhaps by the rules, but also question and challenge the status quo. We want more from our lives, to enjoy our sexuality, to explore radical thought, and to celebrate women who have lived and continue to live unconventional lives. Hi, I'm Dr. Toni, sexologist, educator, activist, and definitely a radical woman. Thank you for joining me as I share stories of women challenging the status quo and living life to the fullest. Join me as we unapologetically march to the beat of a different drummer together. Marlee, welcome back to the Radical Rhythm Podcast. This is the first time I'm doing a part 2 with any guest. There's just so much for us to talk about. And thank you so much for coming back. And if we would quickly rehash what we did in part 1, just in case somebody didn't see the first interview, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and kind of recap what we talked about before?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back. I feel very special. So I'm Marlee. I'm from Canada, but I've kind of lived everywhere, Sagittarius style. I am a coach for women identified folk claiming sensuality, especially after trauma or just a lifetime of shame, internalized objectification culture, all these things. And what we really went into in part 1 was my story of restorative justice after experiencing sexual assault and how and why I fought for a restorative justice outcome, which basically meant that my assailant went to therapy for about 6 months, and then we met in an 8-hour circle instead of proceeding to criminal trial. So we shared about that in a whole lot more depth. And if I missed anything, Toni, you can of course share as well.
Yeah, no, that kind of recaps. So if someone's interested in finding out about restorative justice as a possible process for sexual healing and sexual trauma, refer to episode 18. This is episode number 19. And what I'd like to focus on today, Marlee, is where you are now and where you're going. I have been so inspired by so many young women who are activists, who are actively trying to create a better world. They're not waiting for someone else to do it. They're just doing it themselves. And I would count you amongst that small cadre of young activists working to make the world a better place. So if we can concentrate on that today, that would be fabulous for me. So
thank you. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, we talked about restorative justice. What do? You have a business and you have like an academy or a workshop. I don't know, an institute. What do you call your group, and what do you do with them?
Yeah, so let me give a little bit of context. So after I experienced that restorative justice circle, it was so I like to say it was beyond my expectations, but aligned with my dreams of like the level of closure, transformation, healing, accountability that was possible. So we were really in awe of that. I remember we left the room that day and everyone who was there was like, wow, people need to know about this. Right. So after that, I got really loud about it and I shared with the media, and all on one day, because the publication ban lifted like a month after. So all on one day, 6 articles came out at once, like BuzzFeed, HuffPost, Forbes, like they all came out at once. And so I got a huge response to that. And of course, I got a lot of haters and skeptics, and it's a very controversial topic, as we know. So a lot of questions and trolls as well, but I also got a lot of support, and probably at this point thousands and thousands of messages from survivors and people who had been impacted by sexual violence. And people were saying things like, wow, I wish I knew about this. How did you get to a place where you could do this? And, how is it possible that you went through all of that? And when I look at your Instagram, you're like shaking your booty on the beach and having a good time. Like, how can I do that in my own way? And so the more I got messages like that, the more I was like, I want to share, like I want to help, I want to give those answers. And at the same time, to be very real, I was working more than I ever had. I was I was on the news, and then I was being flown to be on a talk show and like to share this again and again. And at the same time, I had no money. Like I didn't even have enough money to like pay the month's rent. And I just thought, wow, this is ridiculous. I'm doing more work and making more impact than ever. And it can't sustain me. So that's kind of when I decided to make it my life and my business. And I launched this program called the Sensual Wholeness Academy, which has grown and reshaped itself a lot. It's now an 8-month program that women from all over the world literally have taken and continue to take. And it's about basically all of the tools that helped me heal and find like more sexual empowerment than I've ever known. I share those. And I think we talked about in the last episode, like I studied social work, somatic sex education, trauma-informed yoga, eating disorder prevention. So I weave a lot of these things in, but it's basically a really holistic collection of all those tools, from consent communication to learning what our boundaries, what our yes and no feels like in our body, being able to voice that, shedding shame around desire, learning how to really like regulate our nervous system in so many ways to amplify pleasure and empowerment in our lives. So it's really, really beautiful work. And that's like a glimpse into what I'm doing now.
Right. No, it's beautiful. And many of the items that you just mentioned, I just learned about myself, like trauma-informed yoga. I'm like, what's that? So it's myself as a survivor. It's a constant process of learning and trying different things. And that is wonderful that you have an academy, that it's more intensive, and you've collected all the pieces that worked for yourself that you share with those that you work with. We also mentioned in the last segment, but we didn't go into detail, some of the philosophies that you've learned that helped you choose restorative justice as a process that would work for you. And you borrowed, you said, from the Mennonite culture, from the Jewish culture, and the First Nation cultures. Can you talk a little bit about that, insofar as does any of that philosophy come into your academy and the work that you do?
So my family is Jewish, and it was very cool to learn about the ways that restorative justice aligned with and helped and like came from that culture as well, because it really helped to bring me back to some of my own roots around Judaism, and this idea of like repairing the world is a common phrase. In Hebrew, it's tikkun olam, but it translates to let's focus on repairing the world. So it's a similar philosophy, and definitely that's shaped a lot of the work. Definitely learning from Indigenous elders has shaped the work as well, especially around this idea that we're all connected. I think when a lot of people hear restorative justice and, like we were saying before, restoring relationships, they're like, well, what if you didn't have a relationship with the person before? What if you don't want to go back to the relationship that you had, which in most cases you can't go back to that anyway. And for me, that's very true, especially because this person, my assailant, was a stranger to me. So really, when I think of restore, it's not about coming back to a relationship that we had. It's more about restoring a certain view of the world where we acknowledge that we're all connected and we all have to coexist on this planet. And we can't just throw people away or put people away. Like we often talk about prison as, oh, put them away. And it's this acknowledgement, like, where is a way? We're all here, we're all sharing the planet. So that definitely is informed by Indigenous elders, as well as my social work studies, definitely got really deep into that. And honestly, like, I really feel like every aspect of my life informed this in different ways. You know what I mean? It's hard to say like this came from that or that. It's definitely a mishmash of everything I've ever heard and read and all the people I've met as well.
Right. And, so moving forward, rather than restoring what was and who you are becoming, we've briefly touched, but not on the air with our listeners, our common queerness that we both have going on. And I saw you were hashtagging like lesbians of Instagram, and I was like, that's so cool. Like, I never thought of that. Let me do that this week and see if I meet anybody new. Can you talk a little bit about coming out? Was coming out something post sexual trauma? Is it something that you have always identified as?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this because I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough. But for me, I think subconsciously, for sure, I was definitely gay my whole life, but because of compulsory heterosexuality, conditioning, shame, all these things, it was just shoved so deep down that I wasn't one of those people who was always like, I know this, but I'm not ready to say it. I had no idea. And then after sexual trauma is really when I started to feel attracted to women, and I wrote it off for a while. I was like, oh, well, this is just because I'm traumatized and scared of men right now. And then after a while, when I did have the space to deal with that, because I think coping mechanism wise, I just didn't have the space for a while. I was like, I just need to focus on surviving this abuse. I'll think about that later. So it took me about a year, maybe it was actually 2 years after that sexual trauma to come out. And I came out as bi initially. And I just had this kind of logical approach of, okay, I've always been with men and now I'm attracted to women, therefore I'm bi. And it wasn't until this last December that one of my friends who'd identified as bi for a while was like, I think I might be lesbian. And I had just never thought of that before. I had never thought of it as an option. I think just like lack of representation, lack of exposure, I just didn't. So when she said that, it was like this huge light bulb moment for me. And I was like, holy shit. And it was like montage of my life, like putting all the pieces together. After that, I let myself just kind of sit with it internally for a few weeks and just kind of lean into some resources and some representation and things like this. And then eventually I was like traveling with my dad and my sister actually. And I got to this point where I was like, if I don't say this out loud, everything I'm saying is bullshit. Like, you know, that when something's so big in your body and you're like, so the weather, and it just feels like, like such crap. So I just said it and it was super scary. And I'm really blessed to have very progressive, open-minded parents who are both like, beautiful, love is love. And I was like, oh, crying, you know. So it's been amazing because I feel like since coming out, I definitely had this idea that once you come out, you're like done. You're like, I did it. But it's definitely been this process of like unpacking all of that conditioning and compulsory heterosexuality as well, and just realizing like why was I so ashamed of this, and just like working with that. But it's been a really beautiful, like I feel more like myself than I ever have.
Right. Well, you know, the old joke, and I think it's an old joke now, maybe it was on the Ellen show back in the day, that you get a toaster oven, right, when you come out, right? So it's like a prize, and and then you're done once you get the toaster oven, right? But no, it's a lifelong process of understanding self in so many different ways. So let's just put this to bed. When folks if you were confronted by someone that would say, well, you're only gay because you hate men now, what would be your response to that?
Yeah. I would just be like, no, it's not true. I really feel like I have always felt this way. And when I actually, like, beyond all the conditioning and crap, like it really is like love is love, you know. This is where my heart and my body and my spirit, whatever takes me, is like towards women and non-binary folk. And it's not sourced from hate. And I think that's what I thought for a long time, is like, oh, that pull in that direction is not coming from love, it's coming from hatred and fear towards men. And it's just like, actually, it doesn't really have any fucking thing to do with men at all. Really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So where does Marlee go from here? I mean, um, do you see yourself as an activist? Do you see yourself as a feminist? Do you see, how would you like to see the world change, and how are you going to go about doing it? What's the plan?
Yeah. I guess I claim advocate more. I definitely identify with activist, and I also acknowledge that that's like an ongoing learning thing. Like, I'm also, a white, middle class, cisgender woman. So just acknowledging, like, I'm always learning more. I think of like Roxane Gay's like bad feminist term. I'm like, just always learning in that realm. Definitely feminist, yes. I just really want to, and I have commit my life to this on all levels. On like a more micro work level, that looks like my coaching and the Sensual Wholeness Academy, and supporting women very intimately in learning how to, all the things we were saying, claim their boundaries, claim desires, honor themselves, take care of themselves, regulate their nervous system, all these things. Like a really beautiful sense of embodied empowerment. And then on a more macro level, I feel like it's the same sexual reclamation work, but bringing that into systems and institutions. So that can be speaking, and it has been like doing speaking at schools, universities, for like I've done speaking for the US military and Toronto Police Services and some major government organizations. And yeah, just like, I really think that the power of storytelling is really real. And I think that people need to hear from survivors way more, and that we as survivors can claim our lived experience as wisdom way more. And so, yeah, I hope to just like stand on many podiums in front of thousands of people who have some role in making the legislation or whatever it is, and just share from a place of heart and groundedness of like, here's why, we should have a survivor-centered approach to justice, and an approach that bridges justice with healing.
Great. So, and one of the things that I've been watching, because I've been watching your Instagram, and you have such a vibrant personality, such charisma, that it just comes out in your photos. And I see this very vibrant person, not only here, but it looks like there's pictures of you from all over the world. What is this love of travel? I'm assuming there is a love of travel involved in the Marlee.
Yeah. I mean, I've always just like loved the world a lot. Like, I've always just been really in awe of how beautiful the world is. And I kind of separate that from society. I'm like, society, love it. We got some work to do, but the actual world, I've always really, really just been like, wow, it's so beautiful. So travel has always been really precious to me. And once I launched the academy, the work that I do, it's all virtual. And honestly, I know there's so many mixed feelings around so much of the world being virtual now with COVID, but I've also seen so many benefits of that, including access. Like, a lot of women who would not be safe to or able to access programs like this can now do it, and they can have a community of queer or like survivor or whatever it is, women that they've been looking for in their lives through the virtual world. So that's really exciting. So once I brought everything virtual, I could kind of work from anywhere. So I've been to Costa Rica, Portugal, Hawaii, Mexico, I really am dreaming of living in California. That's been my dream for a long time. But yeah, I do. I have 2 Sagittarius placements in my birth chart, so it's no surprise.
Right. Well, fantastic. It seems like you have the world on fire and you're all over the place. I've seen that you've done newspaper articles, podcasts, radio, television. It just seems that the LA area in California, that's where you want to land, I believe,
Yeah.
seems to be a perfect match.
Yeah,
And
I feel that too.
tell us a little bit about the future. Are we allowed to talk about that? What's being
Yeah,
written and done right now?
Yeah, so a few of the things, what the main really exciting one that I think you're referencing is that my life story, specifically like this journey with restorative justice and sexual violence and what's happened since then. We're actually really beginning from the assault till now, is on contract, currently being pitched as a Hollywood TV series. So that's really freaking cool. I'm working on my memoir as well. And I also just recently launched my own podcast, which is called The Sensual Revolution. So some really exciting things. And I really do hope to reach like millions of people with this message of restorative justice and bridging our justice with healing. Just so often, so often, the response to my is, wow, I've never heard of this before. And I hope that by the time I'm done here, many, like at least like everyone in the mainstream is like, oh yeah, like this is an option too. Here's how we can access it. Here's why we might want it. And at least that way people can make an informed decision about their justice process, and we can be equipped to advocate for ourselves, but also systems can be better set up to hear us and to prioritize what we need.
Right. So, that's one Marlee Liss message, is about restorative justice.
Yeah.
And because Dr. Toni Baird is all about women's sexuality, I would be remiss if I missed this opportunity right now to finish our program with a short discussion of a book you just shared online. And I got all excited. That was this morning on Instagram. So this is just, I've been waiting to talk to you for hours about this. It seems that we have a common favorite book, not the favorite, but it's up there in one of the favorites. And the reason I want to discuss this is because I think you have a very powerful message to share with other young women, all women, but especially those that are just coming of age and coming out into their sexuality, whatever fluidity or lack of fluidity or definition or identity or no identity, but just coming out into their own. So that book was Ethical Slut. I saw that you put on there. Can you tell our audience a little bit about that book and what you wrote in the text of your post was powerful, like what you pulled from it. And I know this isn't a quiz. I'm not trying to quiz you on what did you write in your post this morning. But if you had a takeaway from the book, what is the book about and what did it mean for you?
Yeah. Well, on a general level, I feel like primarily the book is known for helping people, helping people create relationships that really line up with their desires more than what conditioning has taught us. Like pretty much all of us are taught that the ideal relationship is like woman and man in a monogamous relationship that buy house, have kids, live together till death. Like that's kind of the one blueprint that we're given. And so Ethical Slut really beautifully breaks down the conditioning around why we might think that way and just validates desires around, well, what does your dream relationship and way of sharing intimacy, like how does that actually look and feel for you, and how can you create that in a way that is ethical, that honors the people around you and also honors your own boundaries and desires. So it's an amazing book that goes
and
like,
don't
it's
let
a
anyone
long book, so
dim
it
your
goes
shine.
really deep into so many aspects of that. But my takeaway, or what I was saying this morning, was that I'm trying to remember that, yeah, this idea that being easy is bad and being difficult or playing hard to get is like more virtuous or classy or desirable. And I just think that we're handed so much crap, so many rules, so many boxes when it comes to our sexuality. And for that reason, a lot of us hold such deep shame around our actual desires and such deep suppression around our boundaries and naming what we want. So I feel like breaking out of all of that and just saying, no, like we all have a right to pleasure, and that's going to look different for every single one of us, is a really, really, really important thing. So I was kind of just breaking down, like, forget that narrative. There's nothing wrong with being quote, quote, easy. Like, what does that even mean? Why have we deemed that immoral? And just do you, essentially, like, just like work hard to, I mean, I'm saying just, it is a big process, but work to unpack a lot of that conditioning around sexuality and to reclaim a version of sexuality for yourself that's actually coming from what feels best for you, what feels most empowering for you, and what feels loving and ethical for the people around you. So hopefully that kind of covers it.
Outstanding. And would this be the message that you would want to give your generation of women coming up and coming out?
Definitely, like you were saying, like one of many messages, but I think what it all comes back to is validate your own wants to such a degree that you can speak them and ask for them and advocate for them. And that is the same message that I have with restorative justice. Like, I was so deep in my own healing and so connected to what I actually wanted and what would actually feel like justice for me. And eventually, after many years, I got to a point of feeling empowered enough and validating that want enough to speak it out loud and ask for it. And I think it's the same thing with our sexuality, our relationships, our joy, our needs, like whatever it is. We all, I think that's the biggest thing that can really help shift our lives, is like, get to know your own body, your own yes, your no so much, and then validate what you want to such a degree that you can speak it out loud and ask for it.
And that is a powerful message, Marlee.
Thank you.
So if someone wanted to reach you and find out more about you and work with you possibly, or join in on your academy, how would they find you?
Yes, so definitely I share a lot on Instagram. You can follow me, Marlee Liss, MarleeLiss. Feel free to message me. I'm a human. I'll say hi. And the academy is opening in October for enrollment, and we'll be welcoming women in from all over the world, anyone who identifies as women. It's freaking amazing. So if you're interested in that, you can either join the wait list now. Again, go to Instagram, click the link in my bio. You'll see that there. Or if it's after October, you could also just join. Definitely, if you click the link in my bio on Instagram, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff, including free resources, free trainings on claiming body love, free group spaces where you can connect with like-minded people reclaiming sexuality. So there's a whole lot in that link in my bio. So that's the best place to go.
Well, Marlee, thank you again for joining me on the Radical Rhythm podcast. And I look forward to witnessing all of the great things that you do and are going to do in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Radical Rhythm podcast today. It has truly been my pleasure to invite guests and talk to you about my passion, the joy in our sexuality, and radical women who march to the beat of a different drum. If you'd like to work with me, Dr. Toni Baer, I have a community where I give seminars every month. I also have a coaching program, both group and individual, and also a course, a self-directed course, because it's all about experiencing the joy life has to offer. I'd love to work with you. Check out my link below, www.tonibearedd.com. See you next week, and don't let anyone dim your shine.